There is a moment, and every person who has ever loved a narcissist knows exactly the moment I am talking about, when you finally stop waiting for the apology that is never coming. You stop replaying the conversations. You stop trying to decode the silence. You stop asking yourself what you did wrong. And in that stillness, something shifts, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, permanently, like a door closing in a room you will never walk back into. That is the moment the narcissist loses. Not when you pack your things, not when you change your number, not when you finally say the words out loud. The real loss happens the moment you stop caring whether they know what they threw away. Because here's what nobody tells you, and what your competitor's content dances around without ever landing on directly. The narcissist does not just lose you, they lose themselves. And they spend the rest of their lives trying to outrun the proof of it. Most people frame this story the wrong way. They talk about what you survived. They talk about your healing, your growth, your transformation. And yes, all of that is real. All of that matters. But there is another story running parallel to yours. A story the narcissist will never post about, never admit to, never let anyone see. It is the story of a person who touched something real for the first and possibly last time in their life, and then, because their psychology gave them no other option, destroyed it with both hands, and then had to wake up every single morning inside the rubble of that choice. That is the story we are telling today. To understand why narcissists destroy themselves after betraying a super empath, you first have to understand what a super empath actually is. Not the watered-down definition, not the social media version, the real thing. Because the word gets used so casually now that it has lost its weight, and the weight of it matters enormously for understanding what happens after the betrayal. A super empath is not simply a kind person. It is not someone who cries at commercials or feels bad when others are hurting. Those are empathic traits, and they are common. What makes a super empathic categorically different is the combination. It is depth paired with discernment. It is the ability to feel everything and simultaneously understand what they are feeling and why. It is radical compassion that does not turn off its perception. Most people who are deeply compassionate are also, to some degree, easily deceived because their instinct to see the best in others overrides their instinct to see the truth. The super empath does not have that blind spot. They see the truth and choose compassion anyway. They see the wound underneath the behavior and respond to the wound rather than the behavior. That is not naivety. That is a level of emotional sophistication that most people, even highly intelligent people, never reach. Now here is where it gets important. The narcissist's entire life is built on one foundational strategy: control the image, control the narrative, control the narrative, control what people see. Because if they can control what people see, they can control how people respond. And if they can control how people respond, they can manage the one thing they are absolutely terrified of: being truly known. Because deep underneath the performance, underneath the grandiosity and the manufactured charm and the carefully constructed persona, there is a self that the narcissist believes is fundamentally, irreparably defective. A self built in childhood, usually from experiences of shame or abandonment or conditional love, that concluded somewhere along the way that the real them is unlovable. Everything the narcissist does from that point forward is an elaborate, exhausting, relentless attempt to make sure no one ever gets close enough to confirm that belief. And it works. With most people, it works perfectly. The average person encounters the narcissist's performance and either buys it completely, becoming a source of the admiration the narcissist needs to feel temporarily whole, or they feel vaguely uncomfortable and back away without ever being able to name exactly why. Neither of those outcomes threatens the narcissist. The first feeds them. The second is manageable. Neither one breaches the wall, but then the super empath walks in and everything changes. Because the super empath does not buy the performance. They see it immediately for what it is: a construction, a defense, an elaborate suit of armor worn by someone who is terrified to take it off. And rather than being fooled by it or repelled by it, the super empath does something the narcissist has never encountered before. They look directly through it and address what is underneath. They see the wound. They feel the loneness behind the bravado. They sense the shame hiding inside the arrogance. And they offer something to that hidden, fractured self, not the performed self, not the false self the world is supposed to admire, but the actual broken person underneath. They offer it warmth. They offer it understanding. They offer it the terrifying, intoxicating experience of being seen. For the narcissist, this is not just attractive. It is destabilizing in the most profound way, because no one has ever done this before. No one has ever looked past the mask without either being fooled by it first or being deliberately shown what is behind it. The super empath sees through it uninvited, without permission, without manipulation, and still stays. Still chooses them. Still returns compassion for pain. And that is precisely one. Here, the addiction begins, not the ordinary narcissistic addiction to admiration and validation, something far more dangerous, an addiction to being real, to the feeling, however brief and however threatening, of existing as an actual person rather than a performance. The narcissist will burn the entire world down before they admit this, even to themselves. But it is true, the super empath made them feel real. And you cannot unfeel that. You cannot find a substitute for it. You cannot manufacture it with someone else. Once you have tasted it, the absence of it becomes a specific, unrelenting, unfillable kind of hunger, which makes what happens next not just a tragedy. It makes it an inevitability that the narcissist will spend the rest of their life paying for. Here's the part that nobody who has been through this wants to hear, but that everyone who has been through this needs to understand. The narcissist was never going to choose differently. Not because they are evil, though the impact of their behavior can feel indistinguishable from evil. Not because they do not feel anything, though they will convince you and sometimes themselves that they do not. But because the psychological architecture they are operating inside of makes a different outcome structurally impossible without a level of intervention and commitment to change that almost no narcissist ever reaches. Understanding this is not about excusing them. It is about releasing yourself from the exhausting identity-eroding belief that you could have loved them better, stayed longer, been more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, and somehow produced a different result. You could not have. And the reason why it tells you everything about why they are now destroying themselves in the aftermath. Think about what the narcissist is actually managing internally on any given day. There is no stable foundati, no self-worth to stand on. There is no internal voice that says, you are enough, you are acceptable, you are lovable as you are, that does not require constant external confirmation to remain credible. What exists instead is a chronic low-grade terror, the kind that does not announce itself as fear, because it has been present for so long it feels like the baseline of existence. A terror that says the real you, the one underneath all the performance, is fundamentally not enough. And that if anyone ever truly sees that real you, the result will be abandonment, humiliation, or worse, confirmation of the thing you have spent your whole life trying to disprove. Every relationship the narcissist enters is therefore not really a relationship in the way most people understand that word. It is a management operation, a controlled environment designed to extract the validation needed to temporarily quiet the terror, while simultaneously ensuring that no one ever gets close enough to threaten the construct. This is why the narcissist behavior follows such a predictable pattern, regardless of who the other person is, regardless of how patient or loving or understanding that person is. The idealization phase where you feel like the most seen, most cherished, most understood person on the planet is not a lie exactly. It is the narcissist at peak extraction. They mirror you with extraordinary precision because they are genuinely, desperately hungry for what you represent. The devaluation that follows is not a switch flipping or a mask dropping, though it feels exactly like that from the outside. It is the inevitable consequence of proximity. The closer you get, the more the narcissist's terror escalates. The more real the connection becomes, the more threatening it is to the defensive structure that their entire psychological survival depends on. So they begin, usually unconsciously, to push, to test, to create distance disguised as criticism or indifference or cruelty. Not because you have done anything wrong, but because you have done everything right. And that is the most threatening thing of all. With most people, this cycle runs its course relatively cleanly. The person being devalued either accepts the new dynamic, recalibrates their expectations downward, and becomes a stable if diminished source of supply. Or they leave, wounded and confused, but without having ever truly penetrated the narcissist's defenses. The narcissist can file them away, construct a comfortable narrative about who is at fault, and move on to the next source without any fundamental disruption to their internal architecture. The wall remains intact, the construct survives, the terror stays managed. But with the super empath, none of that works. And this is the mechanism that the competitor's content gestures toward without ever fully naming. The super empath does not accept the recalibration, not because they are stubborn or confrontational, but because they can see exactly what is happening and why. They can feel the fear underneath the cruelty. They can sense the defensive escalation behind the coldness. And their response to that perception is not to harden or retaliate or shut down. It is to stay present, to hold space, to continue offering the thing the narcissist is simultaneously most desperate for and most terrified by, which is genuine, clear-eyed, unconditional witness. This throws the narcissist's entire management system into crisis, because the system is designed to operate on a fundamental assumption that if you push people far enough, they will either submit and become controllable, or they will leave and become ignorable. The super empath does neither. They stand in the fire and they do not burn, and they look at the narcissist through the smoke with an expression that says, I see what you are doing and I understand why, and I am still here. And for the narcissist, that is not comfort. That is catastrophe. Because if this person will not leave and will not be controlled and cannot be fooled, then the wall that has protected them their entire life is not just under threat, it is already breached. So the narcissist escalates. This is the part that looks, from the outside, like pure cruelty. The betrayal, when it comes, is often spectacular in its destructiveness. Infidelity, public humiliation, calculated dismantling of the super empath sense of reality, the kind of behavior that seems designed not just to end the relationship, but to annihilate the other person's trust in their own perceptions. And in a sense, that is exactly what it is designed to do. Because if the narcissist can make the super empath doubt themselves, doubt what they saw, doubt what they felt, doubt the reality of the connection they experienced, then maybe the narcissist can convince themselves that they were never truly known after all, that the super empath only thought they saw through the mask, that the wall is still intact, that the terror is still managed. But it does not work, because you cannot unknow what you know. And the super empath, even in the wreckage of the betrayal, even in the shock and the grief and the disorientation, still knows what they saw. They saw the real person underneath. They loved that person. And the narcissist knows they know. And that knowledge, that permanent, irrevocable knowing, is the first stone in the avalanche that will bury the narcissist long in the avalanche that will bury the narcissist long after you have walked away and rebuilt your life. Because betraying someone who truly saw you is not just a moral failure, it is a psychological detonation with no safe radius. And the narcissist is standing at the center of it, the super empath Eves, and for approximately 72 hours, maybe a week, maybe slightly longer depending on the narcissist's particular brand of defense mechanism, the narcissist feels something that looks a lot like relief. This is the part that is hardest to hear if you are the one who left, because it can feel like confirmation of everything the narcissist ever implied about you, that you were too much, too intense, too demanding, that the relationship was a burden they are glad to be free of. Do not misread this. What looks like relief is not relief. It is the temporary, intoxicating feeling of the pressure valve releasing. The constant, exhausting proximity to someone who could see through every layer of the construct finally gone, the threat neutralized, the wall for a moment feeling solid again. But then the silence sets in, and the silence is where the destruction begins. Because what the narcissist discovers in that silence, and this is the thing they are entirely unprepared for, the thing their psychology has given them zero tools to manage, is that the super empath was not just a person in their life. They were a function, a critical, load-bearing function in the narcissist's psychological infrastructure, and that function has now been abruptly, permanently removed. Let me be precise about what that function was, because this is where most content in this space gets vague in a way that lets the audience feel the emotional truth without fully understanding the psychological mechanics. The narcissist's internal world is not simply empty without external validation. It is actively chaotic, without a coherent, stable sense of self, without genuine self-worth, without the capacity for what psychologists call emotional regulation. The narcissist exists in a state of constant internal turbulence. Feelings do not process and move through. They accumulate. Shame does not metabolize. It calcifies. Rage does not discharge cleanly. It cycles. The grandiosity that looks from the outside like confidence is actually a pressure gauge, spiking and dropping without warning, requiring constant external input to stay in the range that feels functional. Most people in the narcissist's life manage this by staying in their assigned role. The admirer who provides consistent validation, the subordinate who confirms the narcissist's superiority, the family member who absorbs the displaced rage without pushing back. These relationships are not connections. They are components in a system. And as long as each component performs its function, the system stays operational, if not exactly healthy. The super empath did something none of those components do. They regulated the chaos at the source, not by feeding the grandiosity or absorbing the rage passively, but by being a genuinely stable, genuinely grounded, genuinely grounded, genuinely present human being in the narcissist's immediate environment. Their calm did not perform calm. It was calm. Their steadiness was not strategic. It was constitutive, built into who they are. And over time, without either of them fully understanding what was happening, the narcissist's nervous system began to outsource its regulation to the super empath's presence, not to what the super empath said or did specifically, to the simple, profound fact of their being there. Steady, unshakable, real. When that presence disappears, the narcissist does not just feel lonely. They lose the external stabilizer for a system that has no internal stabilizer to fall back on. Every feeling that the super empath's presence was quietly containing now has nowhere to go. The shame that their acceptance was holding at bay floods back in. The rage that their steadiness was absorbing begins cycling without a target. The grandiosity that their genuine regard was tea. Empring starts overcorrecting wildly, spiking into episodes of superiority so brittle they shatter at the slightest friction, then crashing into pits of emptiness that the narcissist has no language for and no capacity to sit inside. So they do what they always do. They reach for supply. And this is where the self-destruction shifts from internal to visible. Because the narcissist, now operating in a state of genuine psychological crisis that they cannot name or acknowledge, begins making decisions from desperation rather than strategy. They move fast. They attach to whoever is available rather than whoever is suitable. They perform the idealization phase with a franticness that discerning people find immediately off-putting. They come on too strong, too fast, too intense, not because they have suddenly developed genuine feelings for someone new, but because the void left by the super empath is so vast and so acute that they need it filled right now, and they are no longer operating with the patience or the precision they once had. The new person, whoever they are, almost immediately reveals what they are not. They are not the super empath. They cannot hold the complexity. They cannot see through the layers. They do not have the depth or the resilience or the particular combination of clarity and compassion that made the super empath so uniquely, devastatingly effective at making the narcissist feel real. And the narcissist knows this immediately, Even if they perform enthusiasm and connection for the benefit of anyone watching, on some level that they will never fully articulate, they know the difference between someone who sees them and someone who sees the performance. They have felt both now, and feeling both means they cannot pretend the performance is enough anymore. Here is the comparison that quietly hollows the narcissist out over time. Before the Super Empath, Ty's ordinary supply felt adequate because it was all they knew. It was the baseline, the standard against which nothing was being measured because there was nothing to measure it against. But now there is. Now they know what it felt like to sit across from someone who was not fooled, not performing, not there for what they could get, someone who showed up for the actual person underneath all the architecture and found something worth staying for. Every new interaction, every new source of validation, every new relationship is now measured against that experience and found lacking. Not consciously, necessarily. The narcissist will not sit down and make a list, but the feeling is there. A perpetual flatness, a sense of going through motions that used to feel satisfying and now just feel like motion. They try to override this with behavior, with more supply, more conquest, more proof of their desirability and their power. Each new admirer is deployed as evidence against the verdict the Super Empath's departure delivered. Look, someone else wants me. Look, someone else thinks I am extraordinary. Look, I have not been abandoned. I have simply moved on to better things. But the evidence does not stick, because deep in the part of themselves they have spent their entire lives running from. The narcissist carries the knowledge of what actually happened. Someone saw everything. Someone knew them completely, and that person left anyway. Not in confusion, not in anger, in clarity. No amount of new admirers can argue with clarity. No amount of replacements can undo a verdict rendered with full information, and so the self-destruction does not announce itself. It does not arrive as a breakdown or a dramatic collapse. It settles in quietly like water finding its level, a life that looks functional from the outside but is slowly, irreversibly hollowing from within. A person who is performing living rather than actually living, running a program that used to feel like identity, but now, in the absence of the one person who made them feel like a real human being, feels more and more like what it always actually was. A very sophisticated, very lonely, very permanent pretense. There is a concept in psychology called the foreclosed identity. It describes a person who has committed so completely to a particular version of themselves, a version chosen not through genuine self-exploration but through the urgent necessity of psychological survival, that genuine growth becomes structurally unavailable to them, not impossible in the absolute sense, but unavailable in the practical sense because accessing it would require dismantling the very architecture they depend on to function. The narcissist is the most extreme and most tragic example of this. They are not a person who will not change. They are a person whose entire system is organized around the prevention of the kind of honest self-confrontation that change requires. And the super empath, without intending to, without designing it this way, held up the one mirror that showed them that foreclosure in full, because here is what the super empath's departure ultimately proved. Not that the narcissist was unlovable, the super empath loved them, genuinely, deeply, with full awareness of what they were loving. That love was real, it happened. The narcissist cannot take that away from themselves. No matter how many revisionist narratives they construct in the years that follow, what the departure proved was something more specific and more devastating than unlovability. It proved that being loved completely is not enough if you cannot let love change you. It proved that being seen clearly is not enough if you respond to being seen by destroying the person doing the seeing. It proved that the capacity for connection, however real, however mutual, however extraordinary, means nothing if you will not do the terrifying, necessary work of becoming someone who can receive it without detonating. The narcissist knows this, not loudly, not in ways they can articulate over dinner or process in conversations they are capable of having, but in the body. In the 3 a.m. moments when the performance is off and the supply has run dry, and there is nothing left between them and the truth of their own interior. In those moments, they know. They know they had something that people spend their entire lives searching for and never find. They know they were offered a quality of being known and accepted that is genuinely statistically rare. And they know that what ended it was not circumstance, not incompatibility, not bad timing. What ended it was them, their choices, their pathology, their consistent, repeated, ultimately definitive decision to protect the false self rather than risk showing up as the real one. That knowledge does not produce grief the way most people experience grief. The narcissist cannot sit with it cleanly. They cannot cry it out, process it, integrate it, and eventually carry it as a scar rather than an open wound, because doing that would require the kind of emotional honesty and self-compassion that their psychology categorically blocks. Because doing that would, instead, the knowledge sits inside them, unprocessed and unacknowledged, and expresses itself sideways as rage that seems disproportionate to its apparent triggers, as a brittleness in the grandiosity that was not there before, a sense that the performance requires more effort and produces less satisfaction than it once did, as a pattern of sabotaging relationships that get too close, too real, too reminiscent of what they once had and threw away, as a life that from the outside can look successful, even enviable, but that from the inside has the specific, suffocating quality of a room with no windows. Meanwhile, you are outside, in the air, and this is the part of the story that the competitor's content approaches, but never quite fully illuminates, because to illuminate it completely would require shifting the focus from the narcissist psychology to something more important. To you, to what you actually are and what becomes available to you the moment you stop being the container for someone else's unprocessed chaos. The super empath's growth after leaving a narcissist is not a recovery story. Recovery implies returning to a previous state, getting back to who you were before. What actually happens is categorically different. It is emergence. Because the person you were before the relationship, as whole and as real as they were, did not yet have the knowledge that this experience forged in you, did not yet have the specific hard-won understanding of your own boundaries that comes from having had them violated so thoroughly and for so long that you finally learned to feel their edges with absolute precision, did not yet have the clarity about your own worth that only arrives when you have survived someone systematically trying to make you doubt it and come out the other side still standing, did not yet have the particular quality of self-knowledge that is only available to someone who has been pushed to the absolute limit of their capacity for compassion and discovered that even there at that limit, they chose integrity over retaliation. You are not who you were before. You are someone the relationship made, not someone the narcissist made. That distinction matters enormously. The narcissist did not build you. Your own choices built you. Your choice to keep showing up with honesty when dishonesty would have been easier. Your choice to offer compassion when cruelty was being modeled for you, Your choice, finally, to leave. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in the quiet, unshakable recognition that you deserve to exist in a space where your depth was reciprocated rather than consumed. Those choices are yours. That person is yours. And that person, the one who emerged from the fire of that relationship with their integrity intact, is someone the narcissist will spend the rest of their life recognizing they forfeited the right to know. This is the truth that the title of this video points toward, but that can only be understood fully when you follow the psychology all the way down. The narcissist does not destroy themselves after betraying a super empath because they feel bad in the way that remorseful people feel bad. They destroy themselves because the betrayal creates a specific, permanent, irresolvable contradiction at the center of their psychological existence. They need to believe they are special. They need to believe they are capable of extraordinary things, worthy of extraordinary love, operating at a level above ordinary people. But the evidence of their own behavior, the loss of the one person who confirmed that belief from a position of genuine perception rather than manipulation or delusion, now argues against that belief every single day. and they cannot escape the argument because they cannot escape themselves. Every new relationship is a negotiation with that contradiction. Every new source of admiration is measured against the standard that the super empath set simply by being real. Every moment of apparent success is shadowed by the specific, unshakable knowledge of the specific, irreplaceable thing they chose to destroy. Not because they were forced to, not because they had no choice, but because when the moment came to choose between their armor and their aliveness, they chose the armor.